listening to the Betmaker Show. This is the College Football Week 8 preview for Thursday, October 17th, 2019. And now, live from Las Vegas, the host of the Betmaker Show, Brian Blessing.
Always excited to look ahead to the weekend and the big games that are on the docket in college football. And as always, we turn to our pal, Bruce Marshall from the legendary publication, The Gold Sheet. Brian Blessing and Bruce Marshall coming to you from Las Vegas. Hello, Bruce. Week 8. Yikes.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting pretty far into this thing now, Brian. We're on to the downhill side, the second half of the season. And, where did October go? I mean, we're already, most of the way through the month, and basketball starts next week too. So there we go.
Oh boy, I know, and the NBA. Hey, let me just ask you here, as we look at the rankings in Week 8, pretty interesting stuff, but we just know that there's cannibalization that's about to happen with Bama and LSU, and that's kind of cool to see LSU there. Clemson certainly in the discussion, and Ohio State, number 4, have been sensational. If this were a horse race, Bruce, you got Bama, LSU, Clemson, and Ohio State knocking heads on the front end, and Oklahoma is just sitting in the pocket waiting to pounce. Then you get Wisconsin, Penn State, Notre Dame, Florida, Georgia, rounding out the top 10. Michigan's kind of in the hunt there. The Big Ten's a really nice story, Bruce, but kind of know, right? They're just going to start eating each other alive.
Well, yeah, I mean, and you're going to get some teams facing each other maybe more than once in this bunch. Ohio State and Wisconsin are probably going to play. Well, if Ohio State can keep winning here, they run into Wisconsin soon. They'll probably play Wisconsin again in the Big Ten championship game. Alabama and LSU are playing in a couple weeks. So they'll run into each other. And you start to calculate this stuff. There's going to be probably some one-loss teams involved in the Final Four. And how that shakes out, you can already start to sort of calculate it. A team like Georgia, and a lot of people were talking last week what Georgia has to do to get back in it. It's pretty simple. Just win the rest of your games and the SEC title game. That's the only way Georgia's going to get back into the Final Four. But still a lot of football to be played. But the fact some of these teams are going to be playing one another in the next few weeks, that should help weed this thing out at least a little bit.
The ranking system, again, Bruce, and we'll always carp about this. If it's 4, if it's 8, if it's 16, number 5, number 9, and number 17 are going to carp and moan. But I will say the system is patently unfair. For starters, yeah, I know it wasn't a good loss for Georgia, but Georgia beat Notre Dame. So they're both a one-loss team. How does Georgia fall behind Notre Dame? And then you look at Notre Dame's schedule, and they're going to be coming off a bye and play Michigan, and they're going to have a distinct advantage against Michigan in that game. And then they likely run the table the rest of the way. And then all the power brokers ahead of them, some teams are going to lose in the conference championship game. And here we go with Notre Dame again. And, they lose by 35 in the final, in the semis. You're sitting there going, well, the system's broke.
That's the way it's always been with the rankings, which is a real flaw. If you lose early. And listen, it always is that way. And I mean, how does Florida State leapfrog Notre Dame in 1993 if it loses to Notre Dame in November when they're both unbeaten? And the next week, Boston College upsets Notre Dame by 2 points, and then Florida State leapfrogs them again. How does Alabama win one of the polls in 1978 as number 1 over USC when USC went into, it was Birmingham that year, and won handily, yet the Trojans lost a game after that to Arizona State, and that dropped them. It's just the way the rankings, and I don't know what the deal is. It's just human nature, I think, for the voters. And you would think some of the computer polls might figure this out too, but it doesn't seem to be the case. It's just if you lose last, it's the worst thing for you. And that's the case here with Notre Dame and Georgia. Yeah, there's no reason Notre Dame should be ranked ahead of Georgia. They lost to the Bulldogs, yet you see it again.
I know. History has a funny way of repeating itself. All right, let's talk about the 2 Thursday games. if we could, and then we'll dive into the weekend. Louisiana Lafayette and Arkansas State. Louisiana Lafayette 6.5 on the road. The total is 68.5. Now Arkansas State, you look at the injury list. It says Logan Bonner is out, but you go look at the box score for their last game. Hatcher, this kid threw for 299 yards, 21 to 32, 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Is this thing anything other than a track meet?
Probably not. You're right. Hatcher, since his last 2 starts, 46 of 67, 739 yards, 8 touchdown passes. I mean, he looks like he certainly has taken over for Bonner okay. So, yeah, you could see this thing going up and down the field and maybe even give Arkansas State a little bit of a look, although Ulala is pretty good, and it just had its 5-game cover streak snapped by App State last week. But Billy Napier's done a great job. A lot of running backs there for the Raging Cajuns, and Lewis, though, is off a very poor game, his last out in the quarterback against App State. Yeah, I can see this thing going up and down the field. 34-32, Ark State. We think maybe plus the points, the Red Wolves are worth a look as well tonight in beautiful Jonesboro.
All right, UCLA and Stanford. We got a number that's doing a big dance here with Stanford 3.5, 4, some places 5, and it's dancing all over the place here. With Stanford favored, total in the game is 49.5, and you are stupefied by the move.
Yeah, I am. This is a way overreaction on the market to the Stanford quarterback situation. Now, not that it's not important, but I mean, you got to look at the parties involved here. UCLA, we're still not sure their starting quarterback is going to go as well, although the backup was in there the last game for the Bruins. The story here is Stanford. They're going to be going with their third stringer, Jack West, tonight. He has not played much. I saw him when I was up there at the Washington game. He came in late in the third quarter after Davis Mills strained his calf, and he basically just handed off because Stanford was ahead, so comfortably ahead in the game. He can run, from what I'm hearing up there, and I work on Stanford's pregame show. David Shaw is very comfortable with this kid. He's the full playbooks available to him. For much of spring, he took backup snaps because Costello was hurt in spring. He's been running for first-team reps for about 2 weeks here, or week and a half since the Washington game, because Mills has been nursing the calf. And if you just watch Stanford play the Washington game, it all came together for them. Yeah, Mills was in there, but the defense dominated. And there's this series trend with UCLA. It's 11 straight wins for Stanford, and almost every game is a carbon copy of the previous game. A better discipline. More physical. Everything seems to be in the place for that to stick around and stay this year. In UCLA, this thing's getting worse before it's getting better. The Chip Kelly regime is not taking off. Their Bruins are now 24-44, by the way, against the spread since back in the 2014 season. And the defense, like usual, is just getting massacred here. So Stanford, even with a third-string quarterback, and Scarlett running for 157 the last game against Washington, I think we'll be able to bully UCLA once again. So 30-17 Stanford. I think this one won't even be a problem for the Tree tonight.
All right, we look for Pittsburgh and Syracuse, and the Panthers are 3.5 on the road. The total on the game is 51.5. Bruce, I'm staring at this, and I'm like, if it's that simple, something's amiss. But I'm looking at Syracuse, and they beat Liberty. And then they got killed by Clemson. They beat Western Michigan. They beat Holy Cross. But then they played real football teams. They got killed by Maryland. Okay, Clemson, I get. They get killed by them 41-6. Then they lose at NC State 16-10. They haven't beat a decent football team this year, yet this number is only 3.5. Is it an under the lights thing, a night game kind of deal? Because, listen, that's a nice win. Pitt gets a win over Duke on the road. That's no easy place. This is a decent Pitt football team. What am I missing here? I think this number should be higher.
Yeah, I think it should be too. We had it 26-17 Pitt in the gold sheet. I think maybe because Pitt, this is back to your schedule thing of a moment ago. Pitt's been involved in a lot of close games, but the schedule's been pretty challenging. And that the one curveball in there was the Delaware game, but that came on the heels of that upset over UCF. So that was kind of a struggle. But the win at Duke was a good win. And, Penn State, Virginia, even Ohio's not bad. This has been a tough schedule. You're right. Syracuse has not stepped up. They're not near what they were last year when Dungy was there. DeVito is not getting time to throw. He's not as mobile as Dungy was. This team ranks 127th in sacks allowed. DeVito's been running for his life, and Narduzzi's defense will get after him. And Pickett's got a couple of receivers for the Pitt side, Mack and French, who are pretty darn good. So 26-17, like we said, we'll take Pitt. Tough up front. They're tough to run against, too, and Syracuse doesn't do much running. And DeVito, they can't protect him. So it looks like a Pitt win to us.
Oh, interesting games for us here on Thursday and Friday night. Friday night, Ohio State under the lights. A rarity here at Northwestern, laying 28. Total in the game is 49.5. I think there should be a prop in this game. Will Northwestern score? Their offense is pedestrian, but their defense is good.
It is, and you wonder about Northwestern, sticking around this game against Ohio State. I mean, the numbers are there for Pat Fitzgerald as an underdog, and that's a really long sample. They've covered the last two in that role against Wisconsin and Nebraska. They didn't the game before against Michigan State. Usually the bigger numbers they've been getting have been on the road. This one happens to be at home. But I'm just not sure about Northwestern's offense this year doing enough to slow down Ohio State. It looks like Ohio State is just several notches above everybody else, certainly in the Big Ten, and just not really in the mood to get in front of that freight train. And, talk about Fields, the quarterback, the transfer from Georgia, 18-1 TD interception ratio. Plus, he has 8 rushing touchdowns. Maybe this guy should be in the Heisman mix as well. 42-10 Ohio State. Don't see them slowing down. They got the big one coming up in a couple weeks with Wisconsin, and that's one we'll be looking at. Actually, it's next week with Wisconsin, so that's coming up for Ohio State. But they'll take care of business in Evanston on Friday.
For outstanding information and special offerings and promotions, we invite you and encourage you to sign up for our newsletter today simply by going to the website at betmaker.com. You've talked about this in the past, the UNLV-Fresno State game. UNLV, when they catch a truckload of points, can cover those kind of numbers. I wonder about this week, though. Fresno State's laying 15 and a half. Total on the game is 53. UNLV gets a win over Vandy, and you do a double take. That's just talk about a low point for Vandy. I wonder, really, is UNLV prone to a letdown spot where you would take any positive at this point and try to build off it? I think the one thing, Fresno State can score. UNLV does have a decent running game. I like the game to go over the total. I think the number's good. I steer clear of it, but I do think we'll see a lot of points.
Yeah, we could. And UNLV, we get that a couple times a year from UNLV where it looks really good. This has been the pattern for all of Tony Sanchez's 4 previous teams, and now this one. This is the first time we saw it this year, but there's a couple times a year and it looks like they're ready to turn the corner. Then it always sort of regresses back, and it kind of circles back to the defense really just not being that good. And then once mistakes happen on offense, then that seems to happen. But they have had a pretty good success as a road dog, much better against the Power 5 teams. By the way, that we mentioned about Derek Mason being in trouble at Vanderbilt. I think now he's going to lose his job because of that result last week. That's how bad things have gotten at Vanderbilt. Can Fresno? It's not been quite as easy for Fresno this year. The defense isn't quite at the level it was the last couple of years for Tedford. But Tedford remembers that one of those UNLV specials, upset specials, did come up here 2 years ago at Bulldog Stadium. Last year, Fresno won 48-3 at Sam Boyd. It won't be that big again, but I think Fresno will bounce back from that tough loss at Air Force, and UNLV can't do to Fresno what Air Force did last week. 41-20 Fresno. We'll go with the Bulldogs in this one on Friday, although there is that little mystery always with UNLV that once in a while they come up with a big effort like they did last week at Vandy.
All right, what gives in the Duke-Virginia game? Cavaliers at home, laying 3, total 45. We said Duke off the hard-fought loss to Pitt. And the Cavs offense invisible in a road loss at Miami.
Yes, that's very true. And you wonder about Virginia here after the Miami game. I think that knocked the Cavs out of any chance to go into a New Year's Day bowl. And Bryce Perkins, the quarterback, has really been struggling here, and that surprises because we really thought that this guy might be the ACC MVP coming into the year, even ahead of those Clemson guys. But it hasn't worked out. Yet they are back at home, and Bronco Mendenhall has been able to beat David Cutcliffe lately. In fact, he's done better against Duke than Tony Bennett's hoopsters have done against Coach K. So I think Virginia can bounce back here. The schedule's broken very well for Duke since that opening game against Bama, and the toughest game they had was a close loss to Pitt. So I think Virginia can bounce back here. 28-20 Cavs, that's our Gold Sheet score forecast.
All right, hey, let's talk. If we're always willing to do it because they deserve it, is to pitchfork Alabama for always scheduling, the ridiculous cupcake late in the season. And Clemson is laying 24 at Louisville. The total on the game is 61. Let's say they're a look-ahead spot. I just went and looked, Bruce. It's not their fault. I mean, you take a look at what the conference is presenting on an annual basis. But my Lord, they put at Louisville, at BC at home, host Wofford, at NC State, Wake Forest, and South Carolina. I mean, these are glorified scrimmages, man.
Yeah, and that's just the reality of life in the ACC, and Clemson makes its non-conference schedule, picks it very carefully. There's always one of those FCS games, usually with an in-state school like Wofford, and one challenging game. And this year it was Texas A&M, and that was in Death Valley, and they won that one handily. I think the only other thing to look at with Clemson here, or one other byproduct of all this, is that they've been ahead by so much in most of their games, save the North Carolina game, that Dabo's been pulling, Trevor Lawrence and Etienne, who started out the season maybe as Heisman dark horse, but he's just out of the game when after into the second half when Clemson's so far ahead. So it's sort of hurt. That's a byproduct of Clemson winning that big. They might have a little more trouble this week. Louisville's better. Scott Satterfield has turned the cards around. That was quite a track meet last week at Wake Forest, but it was the first loss for the Deacs. It's funny, Louisville keeps working down the ladder at quarterbacks, and they keep getting better, it seems. His third stringer, freshman Conley, last week looked as maybe better than Pass or Cunningham, the guys who preceded him. 275 total yards, 3 TDs. Looked very confident back there. And Satterfield's got an awfully good point spread mark, 17-5-1 since late in 2017 at App State and here at the Ville. 42-26 Clemson. They'll win. I don't think they're going to completely embarrass Louisville here, which played Notre Dame pretty tough on opening night. Satterfield has slowed the games down since, certainly from the Petrino disaster last year when this score was 77-16. But it's a lot of points to be given a competent Louisville team.
Here's a weird one. You go, why would you do this? Because the bottom line, it doesn't matter, what the game is if it's on the board and you can make money on it. I just wanted to get your read on it because I'm kind of staring at it, and that's Buffalo at Akron in a MAC game. Akron is an atrocity. Buffalo lost at home to Ohio in overtime where neither team could put points on the board. And Buffalo went through 3 quarterbacks in that game. They're trying to figure out, what young quarterback can get the job done for them. The one thing, Bruce, they have 4 running backs that were effective in the Ohio game. I just think Buffalo just tilts the field and runs the ball down Akron's throat. Am I missing something here? I think Buffalo just punches them in the mouth. Akron, UMass, and who am I missing? The 3 worst by a country mile. Who's the third one? I'm losing my marbles.
UConn, maybe.
Yeah. But Akron's bottom of the barrel city, aren't they?
Oh yeah. I mean, they lost to UMass. If you could believe.
Oh my.
There's a few others. I mean, UTEP as well. You could throw in there. But not only Akron 0-6 straight up, 0-6 against the number. This is the worst team in the country. I think losing to UMass confirmed that. And this is a new coach in here, Tom Arth. He's a young guy, moved up a level here. I mean, Terry Bowden did not leave him much, and it's pretty apparent that whatever Akron did last year, I mean, Bowden squeezed a couple wins out of these guys because it doesn't look like Arth is going to do it. And losing a homecoming decisively to Kent State. That's not too good. Buffalo will get something together here, and Patterson and Marks are a very good running back duo. The only plus for Buffalo losing some of these close games, it might pull Lance Leopold off of the radar. He would be on the radar if some of these jobs open up, and I would expect him to get a call. Rutgers has opened up. They might call him. BC might call him if something happens to the Dazio, several others. He's on the list, but it temporarily might be actually helping him to stick around Buffalo. That they've lost a couple of these close games. 28-6 Bulls. No reason for Akron to stay any closer than that.
Okay. No, that's a great point too about Leopold, because that conference, the bottom line is anybody that succeeds in that conference, I mean, it's literally the springboard. And they were gutted at the skill positions, they were gutted by graduation. All right. Move on. How do you treat Purdue and Iowa? Iowa 17.5, totals 48. Iowa off a game where they back-to-back games, Bruce. They played their hearts out, losing 10-3 at Michigan, and then losing 17-12 at home to Penn State. Although, boy, if you watch that game, the officials certainly gave them every chance to win that game. There were some really squirrely things that went on in that game, but you just don't know where the offense is going to come from Iowa.
Yeah, that's the problem. But I again here, look at the schedule here and see, that was Michigan does have a real defense, and so does Penn State. And nonetheless, that was very disappointing that Nate Stanley couldn't get things going. They didn't score a touchdown in those two games until right in the last 2 minutes there, the Penn State game. So it's been a dry city there. It's been a desert like for this Iowa offense the last couple of weeks. That shouldn't happen against Purdue. Purdue doesn't have that much defense. The one X factor here is that we know Jeff Brom is a quarterback whisperer, and he's had some injuries at quarterback this year. And Elijah Sindelar, his starter, is done with the broken collarbone. But Plummer, the freshman, came in there, and he finally looked good last week. 420 yards. They blew out Maryland, so something to think about this week. But now this is also a real defense he's facing in Iowa. And I would expect the Hawkeyes to bounce back here at Niall Kinnick Stadium. And by the way, this defense has held 5 of 6 foes beneath 300 yards. So might be tough going for Plummer. 38-16 Iowa, bouncing back into the win column, we think, this week.
Oh, dare I say this out loud? Kansas at Texas, and Texas is laying 21.5. And listen, Kansas they had their moment this year. They had the big win, but there's actually at BC, but there's a level of respectability with the Jayhawks now, and a team that can score points. And Texas is coming off, the Oklahoma game, the letdown to the moon. Sitting there looking at it going, honest to God, am I even thinking of saying this out loud? But I think everything points to Kansas in this spot. And by the way, Kansas, you could say there was moderate respectability, losing by 25 to Oklahoma. And you wonder what the level of interest for Texas will be this week.
Well, that's a good question. Now, Texas has played pretty well after Oklahoma in recent years. They haven't had much of a letdown, but that's still something to consider because they lost a tough one last week. But more than that, Tom Herman is chalk. He's only 11, 20, and 1 since 2016 laying points. Is not as compelling as Tom Herman as a dog, which is 14 and 3 since 2015. And remember, worse Kansas teams than this have covered the last 3 big numbers versus Texas. And you're right, Les Miles in this Jayhawk edition, they've been mostly competitive, save for a very poor first half a few weeks ago against TCU. So, yeah, there's some technical ammo here. Kansas is moving the ball a bit better. And this has not been a great spot for Tom Herman in the past, laying big points. 41-24 Texas. There's still plenty of room in there for Texas to win handily and not cover this number. And Kansas, which slipped inside the big impost against Oklahoma, might do it again.
Interesting game, Bruce. Tell me about this one. Florida, South Carolina. Florida, we see this every year, 6-0, life is good, a lot of big wins, and then all of a sudden you suffer that first loss at the hands of LSU, and at LSU. There's no disgrace in that whatsoever. But in many instances where teams feel that opportunity lost, that first loss of the year, the next week can be ugly. The one thing I would say for South Carolina, I mean, they're feeling their oats. I mean, they get a win at Georgia, so they could be prone to a letdown off the monster win. One of these teams is going to react weird. I wonder which one it is.
Yeah, and so it is sort of a Dr. Phil sort of game this week. I think Florida, though, it's still there. Florida was unlikely that the Gators would run this schedule unbeaten, but it's still in front of them what they can do. If they can beat Georgia and hold serve there in the rest of the SEC, they could get back in the SEC title game and take their shot. I mean, who knows? I thought Florida actually played very well most of the way against LSU until very late, and LSU stretched that out to 14. But Florida was ahead in that game into the second half. But the big deal here now, we talked about a third string quarterback at Stanford earlier in the segment. South Carolina probably having to go with what was originally its third string quarterback, Joyner, although he had moved up to backup after Bentley's injury. But Helinski looks like he might be out here with the knee against Georgia last week. And when Joyner was in, I mean, it was pretty much different than West at Stanford. It was just handing off. I don't think this guy can throw that well. I mean, he's a pure sort of an option skittery type. And I'm just not sure against this Todd Grantham defense that's going to be enough for South Carolina. 27-16 Florida. We think the Gators are the team bouncing back in a good way, and we'll see what happens.
All right, Bruce, let's go Big 12. Baylor at Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State's laying 4. Total on the game is 68.5, expecting kind of a track meet here. Baylor football is back, but all of a sudden now the weight of expectations, the deeper you get in a season. And the one thing I would say about Oklahoma State, they've been printing money, 5-1 against the spread. They are coming off a loss at Texas Tech.
Yeah, we're seeing home field seems to mean something. At least winning games in the Big 12. Baylor's been cutting it really close in some of these recent games. Oklahoma State's had a week off after it got ambushed down in Lubbock. Oklahoma State was rolling unbeaten too into a couple weeks ago, and that was the first loss, but has had a week off. The deal here is that Baylor has not had to face a running back like Chuba Hubbard from Oklahoma State. He's leading the nation already over almost 1,100 yards. And here we are in mid-October, so he's putting up huge numbers. Baylor hasn't had to face a guy like that yet, and I think the Mullet Man can get him here. It's been sort of a home team series in recent years anyway, and I think that trend continues. 35-26 Oak State. I think this will take Baylor out of that unbeaten conversation, which is going to happen sooner or later anyway with Baylor. A little bit of a pretender there in this undefeated club, but I think it ends at least that run for the Bears in Stillwater.
All right, Michigan is at Penn State, Bruce. Going to be a high-profile game. Penn State's laying 9. Total on the game is 47. Penn State survives the game at Iowa, and if they can get by this one, then the table's set for them to keep it going and get to November 23rd at Ohio State, conceivably with a pair of unbeatens. But first things first, after a physical game against Iowa, not going to be an easy task here. To that end, this is the annual whiteout game at Penn State, and that is one crazy atmosphere that Harbaugh's throwing his kids into.
Yeah, and this has been an interesting series lately because Michigan and Penn State have taken turns landing haymakers on one another. Last year it was 42-7 Wolverines in Ann Arbor. 2 years ago here, and that might have been a whiteout game too in 2017, 42-13 Penn State. Year before that, 49-10 Michigan at Ann Arbor. So you can see they've just taken turns hammering one another.
It's Penn State's turn.
Now it's Penn State's turn, so it's as simple as that. But more so, I mean, the defense is really, I think, better for Penn State maybe even than Michigan's. I mean, they rank second nationally, 8 points per game, fourth in total defense, third versus the run. This Michigan offense, which failed miserably in its toughest test against Wisconsin and didn't do much against Iowa, I don't see how it does too much here, as Patterson's come up short in these situations. I'll tell you, Clifford, the new quarterback for Penn State this year, he's got some moxie. He knows how to play. He reminds more than a little bit of Trace McSorley. His numbers are pretty good, and they've got some balance with those runners, Brown and Kane, and Hamler and Dotson are a pretty good wide receiver combo. 27-14 Penn State. That keeps the Nittany Lions are also in this discussion too, and they've got Ohio State coming up pretty soon as well. So that's going to be big for Penn State, and that won't be until later November. But they can still stay in this thing for a while. And I think they beat Michigan, which has fallen short in this role too many times.
All right, let's wrap it up with a Mountain West game. Intriguing in that it's a running team against a passing team. It's Air Force 3 at Hawaii, total 66.5. The one thing I would say, we know Hawaii is a completely different animal home and away. It is tough to prepare for that Air Force running game that is producing points. Is this neither team can stop each other? Is that the most likely scenario?
Maybe. I think most likely is Air Force gets them here. I've maintained this is a really good Air Force team the whole season. They lost 2 very bitter games. One when their quarterback got knocked out, Hammond, for a short while in the second half against Boise, a game they had a look at, and they ended up losing that by 11. And a last-second loss at Navy 2 weeks ago, which is awfully good this year. I think we saw last week what this Air Force can do when and it's clicking good. And they took over that game in the second half against Fresno and used up almost all the fourth quarter on one drive. I mean, you talk about bleeding the clock. They bled literally the last 13 minutes of the game, and Fresno couldn't get Air Force off the field. This is a problem for Hawaii, which is allowing 5.3 per carry. I like Nick Rolovich and the things that he's been doing, but it's a matter of just keeping possession. It's a shorter week for Hawaii, too. A short week to get ready for these guys after playing at Boise and getting whipped last week. So you got a quick turnaround against this option is a tough task for Nick and his defensive coaches. 37-23 Air Force. We think they go in there and win handily. This is a Gold Sheet key release, and Air Force, I think, is certainly a team to keep watching as we move forward.
We love the information. The Gold Sheet, a spectacular publication. He's our pal, Bruce Marshall. Rolling right along week 8 in college football. The season is flying by. Always great information, Bruce. Always a treat, my friend. Enjoy this week in college football.
Betmaker, let's make some money tonight.
Well, that's the Betmaker Show for now. We publish multiple times each week. We'd like to thank you for listening. And if you liked what you heard, please take a moment to leave a rating and review or subscribe to our show feed, or share our show with a friend or two and help us grow the show. We very much appreciate it. Visit us on the web at betmaker.com. And reminder to sign up for the newsletter. Thanks to our engineer, Darren Vandermolen, and producer, Mike Gallivan. The Betmaker Show is a production of Cardinal Marketing Incorporated. Betmaker is a registered trademark. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this content without the express written consent of Cardinal Marketing Incorporated is strictly prohibited.
The handicapping and sports odds information contained on this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Please confirm the wagering regulations in your jurisdiction, as they vary from state to state, province to province, and country to country. Using this information to contravene any law or statute is prohibited. The podcast is not associated with, nor is it endorsed by any professional or collegiate league, association, or team. This podcast does not target and is not intended for an audience under the age of 18. If you think that you have a gambling addiction, stop this podcast now and please seek help.
Gambling and betting on sports is a form of entertainment and should be about having a good time. But when done excessively, it may negatively affect other areas of a person's life, such as their physical and mental health, school or work performance, finances, and or interpersonal relationships. At Betmaker.com and the Betmaker Show, we're concerned about the addiction that gambling may cause, and for this reason, we encourage everyone to practice responsible gambling. An approach to gambling that helps you ensure that it remains an enjoyable activity. Here are the main principles of responsible gambling. Don't think of gambling as a way to make money. Always gamble with money that you can afford to lose. Set limits and stick to them. Never chase losses. Don't gamble when you're depressed or upset, and create a healthy balance. Always be aware of how much time you spend gambling or thinking about gambling. And do not allow gambling to cause you to miss out on time with family and friends or time spent on other activities you enjoy. By following these guidelines, gambling can be a good time and great entertainment. If you feel at any time that your gambling is taking away from important areas of your life, is causing you stress or depression, or is leading to financial losses that are beyond your control, please reach out for help. Learn more at responsiblegambling.org.